Everyone, welcome back to the Wise Bubbler YouTube channel. This video is a follow-up video for my previous video on how to send beautiful responsive HTML templates using Sendgrid on Bubble. That's a lot. Basically how to send nice emails from Bubble. So in this video, I'm going to go over how to send each HTML emails with lists inside of them. So that would be helpful for receipt, for order confirmations, and other emails like that. If you haven't watched my previous video, I highly recommend you do watch it just so you understand the reference to some things that I'm doing. So the way you do this is you start off just like the other templates in the template center of your Sendgrid account. And after doing that, you create a new template, and I won't do that right now. You click Create Dynamic Template, but this time I would use the code editor because I have found it very easy to do it in their no-code email builder. And the reason is because you can't edit the code of tables. So in this case, for example, this is a table. And just to show you how it looks like in the code editor, you can see it here. So you can't edit this table, the code for this table. So it makes it really hard to build really nice emails with lists. So going back here, let's jump into the code editor. I just created a blank template. And in here, the only code I really added was this. And just to explain this, OL means an organized list or ordered list. And the way Sendgrid works is to do a list. Essentially, we're going to be sending in data to Sendgrid, and they're going to send it to the user we want. And if we send a list, we have to define what Sendgrid needs to do with each item in that list. So here we're defining each item, where we want to start inserting for each item. And the item, the only standard thing we're typing is the two curly brackets and each, and the hashtag each. And then this order is the name of the data type that we want to use. And then we close it with two curly brackets. And then everything in between this line and where we end the each will happen for every item we send in the order data type. So for example, if we're ordering shoes, shirts, and a hat, whatever is inside these brackets will happen for the shoes, the shirt, and the hat. And so for each line, or I don't know what Lee stands for, we're going to print out you ordered this dot item. So item is the data field name I defined for an item in an order. So for example, shirt. And for each thing, if you want it to be dynamic, you put this dot, and then at this price and this dot price. And so it's going to go essentially through each item that you send and say, okay, you ordered shirt at this price, $10. You ordered hat at this price, 12. And then when I close the each, that's all that's going to happen for each item. So let's just see this in action. And here's an email that I sent. Is you can see you ordered shirt at this price, 10. You ordered hat at this price, 2. Now, obviously you don't want your emails to look like this, but this is just a higher level, just explanation of what's happening in the code. So let's jump back to a more complicated example. And in this case, we want to use this template. Okay, this is the design editor, but like I said, we don't want to use that. So let's jump in to the code editor for that same template. So it's the same template, I'm just using the code editor. And in this case, you can just click and see what code corresponds to each part of the email, which is really nice. So in my case, what I saw was I wanted to jump to this table. I wanted to delete the second column, essentially. And I just wanted one column that would essentially repeat for each item. So think about it like a repeating group in Bubble, for example. So I clicked here on the data and on the code editor. And what it took me to was, here, let's jump to each order. But it took me to this table, essentially. So I had to kind of play around with it to find the top of the table because you want to find the beginning of that table. And I want that table to repeat for each order item, essentially. So for hat, I wanted to repeat. For shirt, I wanted to repeat. So here for Veggie Bought Me, you wanted to repeat. And then you want to just repeat this with a different name and price. So going back to the code editor, we can see each item. And then I looked for the text that was pre-filled here, so Veggie Bought Me. And if we scroll down, we can see that it was here. So I just literally Control F and looked for Veggie Bought Me. And instead of Veggie Bought Me, I put, again, this dot item. So I want the name there of the order I'm doing. And then I looked for the price that's written here. And again, you can Control F that. And I replaced it with a $sign and this dot price to get the number. And so once I finished that, I then had to find the bottom of the table to actually close off the each order. And here you go, I closed off this each order. So now we have essentially a table, or we can call it in Bubble terms like a repeating group. And the next thing I had to do is in this template, it's defined as two separate columns. So like in Bubble, you wouldn't want to create a new group for each item. You just add a repeating group. And so I had to find in the code the second table that was very similar and essentially delete it out. So we have one table that's going to repeat for each item. So let's go back a sec to the code. All right, so now we have the template set up in the HTML, and you can click save. And then the next thing you have to do is go back to your Bubble app. How do you actually send that data to Sendgrid? Because Sendgrid can only read JSON. It doesn't read Bubble data types. So let's go back here and look at this JSON. So this is very similar to, let me make this a little larger. This is very similar to the JSON we used in the previous video. Again, if you want access to my editor from the previous video, it is linked in the bottom of the video in the description. So over here, the only difference is we have here in order, which is a list. So the way you write a list in JSON is you have this brackets, and then for each item in the list. So for example, here we have a subject, and the subject data type is not a list. It's just one thing. And so we just put subject, brackets, and close it off, and comma in between. But for the order, remember, we define the order as we want it to be send a list of items. So to add a list, essentially what you have to do is open these brackets and curly brackets each essentially item in the list. So we have order, then we have the item pants and the price 29. Item shirt, price 25, then we close that off. And everything else is exactly like the previous email would be. We just have the to, the name, and again, dynamic template data, the from. And if we go in here, we don't want to hard code the items, right? I just hard coded them to show you what the end result would be. But in a real world example, we want Bubble to dynamically generate it based on a repeating group, for example. So I'm now going to go over how to actually generate this JSON directly in Bubble, no plugins required. And that's one of the themes I'm using here, because I really don't like plugins. So we're going to do it without a plugin. Before we actually look how we're going to generate that JSON list, let's look at our data types. So what we have here is order, and each order has, and that's just the general order data type. You probably structure this differently. I'm assuming there's just one order, for example. And the item is the text, and the price is the number, just to have it correspond with our Sendgrid email we're sending. And so over here, we have, let's look at it live for a minute, just how it works. So over here, we have a create receipt item. So we have pants, shoes, hat, and let's call this shirt, and let's put a price of $30. And so we can see that shirt was generated at $30. Now we can send an email to the wisebubbler@gmail.com, and we'll send it here. And now let's go to my email and see. And you can see that we got this email, and we have the pants, shoes, hat, and shirt with their corresponding prices. So let's go back to our editor and see how we actually sent that email and generated the JSON list for Sendgrid. So when I click send email, I'm using the plugin we created, which is send email, Sendgrid, send email order list. And the dynamic content I'm using for now is just the to, the order, and the total. So order is where the list comes in. So I'm going to generate JSON directly in Bubble, no plugins, no nothing. And JSON, again, is just a way where I communicate with the API. So the way I communicate with Sendgrid and the way APIs communicate is through JSON. So I'm going to take the repeating groups list of orders. So if we go here, we have list of orders. And I am going to format as text. So I'm taking the list and formatting as text because I don't want it formatted as a list in Bubble. I want it to be formatted as JSON. So for each item in the list, so for shirt, hat, pants, I'm going to add a curly brackets, and you can essentially just copy this. But essentially for each one, I'm taking item, putting in the item, price, putting in the price dynamically. You have to make sure this corresponds exactly to what you have in your Sendgrid template. And most importantly is you have to have a comma delimiter in between each order. So arguably the most important thing. Also, don't include any spaces or anything like that in this, because that will mess up your JSON. So if it's not working, it's probably because there's a space or you hit enter by accident and want to move it down a line. That will mess up your JSON. So I would just keep it in one line. And that's it. And that's how we generated the JSON that we saw over here directly in Bubble to send to Sendgrid. So going back, now that we saw how we generated the JSON, and then the total, that was the only other item that I really wanted to add in dynamically. But then again, you can go back to this template and look at each item here. And if you go back to the last video, you'll know exactly how to, you can change the subtitles and put, I think they call it mustache notation around it, and it will be dynamic. But I just wanted to focus in this video on the list items, so you can, again, customize everything else easily. And so that's essentially how you send HTML email lists. Again, it's a little bit more technical than you may have been used to, but it's a great way to learn, and it's pretty easy once you understand how JSON works. So if you like this video, definitely hit subscribe. And if you want access to the editor, I'm putting a paid link in the description. If you have any trouble paying for it, definitely feel free to reach out. And lastly, if you want to learn about any other APIs or connections, I'm happy to create them, and let me know on Twitter or YouTube. And I'm starting a little bit on TikTok at WiseBubbler on all of them. And thank you for watching.